What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Hala Garani tonight.
I'm Phil Black in Lviv, Western Ukraine, and this is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome to our viewers around the world and in the United States this hour. I'm Hala Garani reporting live from Lviv, Ukraine. The American President Joe Biden wrapped up his trip to Europe with a blunt declaration that Vladimir Putin needs to go. It was a shockingly candid remark, and it came at the very end of the president's speech in Warsaw and provoked a curt response from the Kremlin. The White House quickly clarified that Mr. Biden was not calling for regime change in Moscow. Even as Mr. Biden was in Poland, Russian missiles struck another fuel facility, this time in Lviv, not far from the Polish border and quite close to our position here. Ukrainian forces claim they've recaptured several towns from the Russians, including this village near the Russian border. New video purports to show the Ukrainians attacking Russian troops holed up inside a school. Ukraine's president again issued an urgent call for more military assistance from the West.
Ukraine cannot shoot down Russian missiles using shotguns, machine guns, which are too much in supplies. It is impossible to unblock Mariupol without a sufficient number of tanks, other armored vehicles, and of course, aircraft. All defenders of Ukraine know that. All defenders of Mariupol know that. Thousands of people know that. Citizens, civilians who are dying there in the blockade. The United States knows that. All European politicians know. We told everyone, and this should be known as soon as possible by as many people on Earth as possible, so that everyone understands who and why was simply afraid to prevent this tragedy.
That was Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, Mr. Biden's speech also pushed back against how Russia has tried to frame the war from the get-go. The U.S. president described it as part of a larger battle between democracies and autocracies, and he urged democratic nations to prepare for a long fight on that front. Phil Mattingly is in Warsaw.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Tonight, President Biden delivering a forceful and dramatic condemnation of Vladimir Putin.
A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty.
The White House later clarifying Biden was not calling for regime change, but an unmistakable message.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia.
As Biden delivered a clarion call to Western democracies at the moment of the highest stakes, drawing parallels to Eastern Europe's emergence from Soviet rule.
It was a long, painful slog, fought over not days and months, but years and decades. But we emerged anew in the great battle for freedom, a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression.
The speech a capstone of a European swing defined by unity in the face of searing images of disaster just a border away.
Ukraine and its people are in the front lines, fighting to save their nation. And their brave resistance is part of a larger fight for an essential democratic principles that unite all free people.
Biden's remarks coming just hours after new Russian strikes in Lviv, just 40 miles from the Polish border. And as Biden's caustic view of the Russian president grows even darker.
You're dealing every day with Vladimir Putin. I mean, look at what he's done to these people. What does it make you think?
He's a butcher.
And his warnings to the Russian leader of NATO's commitment grows even sharper.
Don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
In the final day of an urgent and hastily arranged trip to Europe that brought Biden face-to-face with dozens of Western leaders, he sat down with Polish President Duda, pledging close ties for a NATO country housing 10,500 U.S. troops.
We do acknowledge that Poland is taking on a significant responsibility that I don't think should just be Poland's, it should be the whole world, all of NATO's responsibility.
And more than 2 million Ukrainian refugees. Biden meeting some firsthand.
You're so big. You're all brave.
And just hours after a surprise meeting with the Ukrainian foreign and defense ministers,
the good thing is that since the beginning of the war, I learned how to sleep under any conditions.
a face-to-face sit-down where Biden pledged even more U.S. support, a welcome commitment for a country under siege, and Western democracies facing a challenge now reshaping European power dynamics.
It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay.
And the president is now aboard Air Force One flying back to the U.S., but just because the European trip is complete doesn't mean this issue is complete or dissipating in any way. White House officials are very clear. They know it's a long road ahead. It was really the genesis of the president's decision to make these remarks in Warsaw, to underscore that the Western unity that we've seen over the course of the last 4 months, it can't just be a one-time thing or a one-month thing. It has to be sustained, not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but for years, maybe even longer, as the world, at least according to the president, has entered a very clear and very real inflection point.
Phil Mattingly, thanks very much. In Warsaw, here in Lviv, fire crews were battling a huge blaze after Russian missiles struck a fuel storage facility. CNN's Don Lemon was on the scene moments after the attack.
You could hear the flames roaring, and what they're concerned about is another one of these tanks exploding, so they're pushing people back until they can get control of this blaze. You were mentioning how close it is to a neighborhood. It's really close to a neighborhood. It's on the other side. There's a little valley in here on the other side of a retention wall. But Peter, if you can just go around just a little bit and show them how close this is to a neighborhood real quickly, and then we'll get back on the flame. So it's really, really close. This is a neighborhood where everyone has gathered, all of the rescue people, and they've done this on a number of different streets. So if you'll come back here. So we're, I guess, within a tenth of a mile or so from where this is happening. But again, look at those flames. They're just roaring, black smoke coming out of there, and you can see them putting the fire retardant, spraying the fire retardant on this. But again, as you said, it is a chaotic scene. They're running fire hoses through this residential neighborhood, this retention wall, and then to the other side of that valley in tanks. Think of it as you will, for those of you who live near a chemical plant, and you see these large, round storage facilities that carry either fuel or grain or what have you. That is what is happening here. This is a fuel storage facility northeast of the city. Again, we're told it's not anywhere near where that blast went off just a couple of weeks ago when they hit that airplane repair facility.
That was Don Lemon. Let's bring in CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Leighton. He's in Washington. So this isn't the first strike on the western city of Lviv where we are reporting from. We had one against a military training facility, against an aircraft repair hangar near the airport. Now these fuel storage tanks, and also we understand from the mayor, a location was hit south of the city that appears also to have been some sort of repair facility. Do you think this was a message sent to Biden, who was just one border away yesterday?
I do, Hala. It's it's very clear to me that the Russians are sending a message not only to Biden but to NATO at large, and that message basically is this: we can strike anywhere in Ukraine, and we'll strike even close to NATO, and we will have the precision munitions that are capable of doing that fairly accurately. I think they're trying to counteract some of the reporting that we've done that says they use a lot of munitions that aren't precision guided, that are, in essence, dumb bombs that go and hit anything that happens to fall in their path, and that's kind of the difference. There is that part of the Russian inventory that can do things quite precisely, but the vast majority of that Russian inventory of weapons is not that precise.
Right. And it's not a huge surprise that they would target something like a fuel storage facility. I mean, the concern I had with the strike in the south is that really just a few meters away was a residential tower block. So all you need is really one misfire, one miscalculation, and you're hitting densely populated civilian areas in a city as west as Lviv, which has been relatively safe so far.
Yeah, that's true. And, it doesn't take much to make a mistake. You can type in the wrong coordinates. If you're the weaponeer for a weapon like that, somebody who's setting the targets for a weapon like that, and mistakes like that, be not only in terms of, the wrong target hit, but especially in terms of civilian lives affected. And that's a very big danger in a situation like this.
Yeah. So this comes literally, it came a few hours after the Russians claimed that their phase one was over, according to our sources, and they were now going to concentrate on the east and on liberating, quote unquote, these eastern regions. And that very day, they decide to strike at least 2 targets in the west. Are they just plain lying?
Yes, they are. What they're doing is, it may be true that they are going to put a preponderance of their effort into the east. That was one of their original war aims, but their war aims also included going after Kyiv and going after Kharkiv and other cities, and also attacking in the south. So they found it difficult to do all of that. And they may very well be concentrating on the east because that would make sense from a military perspective. But they're not going to give up on attacking other areas because they want to keep the Ukrainians guessing. They want to make sure that there is as much uncertainty as possible, not only among the government in Ukraine, but also among the civilian population. And that's part of their effort. They're very good at deception, and that's part of that plan.
But I wonder, I mean, does this, and the President Biden did say that this was a long-term fight, does this mean that the Russian military, rather than acknowledge that their initial goals have not been met, kind of try to face save by saying this was always about the Donbass region, and that they would come up with some sort of way to climb down from this, rather than that scenario, which would be the best case scenario, I guess, that really what they're doing is obfuscating and hitting targets outside of the areas that they've said they would hit, and that this is really going to be a long-term, long slog, and that we should be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think that's the case, Hala. I think we should be prepared for a long slog, unfortunately, because that is kind of their way of doing things. They did indicate that they wanted to attack these areas in one way or the other, and they find it I think useful from their perspective to try to keep the Ukrainians off balance. That's in essence what's happening here, but they are clearly doing things that indicate that their first plan has really failed. It's really kind of a sequencing issue for them, I think, more than anything else. They thought that they could conquer Ukraine very quickly. That did not happen. So this is, in essence, Plan B, a corollary to Plan A, which was to take the whole thing.
And lastly, I mean, that's obviously this is Plan B, but it's going to, I mean, this costs money. They're not able to raise funds in the way they were before. Now they're ostracized from the banking system. Their central bank can't raise funds. The ruble is collapsing. So they do have the gas and oil money coming from some countries, not all of their previous customers. But so how long, what is the staying power of the Russian military here?
Well, that's a really good question. We're not quite sure, to be honest, Hala. That's something that we're not quite sure of. But if I were venture to make a prediction here, this is something that they'll definitely run out of time. But they're racing against the clock. But they are betting that they can withstand any perturbations that are caused by the sanctions and by other efforts to keep them boxed in. And they think that they can withstand that in long enough in order to create the situations that they want in Ukraine, which is to destabilize the government and possibly to let it fall, and then to take over at least a portion of the country so that they can say, look, we've accomplished our aims, whether those are the real aims or not. That is what they're going to say, and it's going to certainly cover up for any malfunctions and disappointments, to use their term, that occurred in this situation.
Well, thank you very much, Cedric Layton. As always, pleasure talking to you this evening, or this morning, this evening your time, this night your time, I should say. Thank you so much. Russia claims one of its cruise missiles destroyed a fuel depot in Mykolaiv, Ukraine on Saturday. The city near the Black Sea has been devastated by fighting, with homes reduced to rubble in Russian air raids. Despite the violence and despite the danger, some families in Mykolaiv are trying to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. CNN's Ben Wiedemann has our report.
Once more, the people of Mykolaiv can have their daily bread. I see a change, says Maxim. Now it's getting back to normal, and I really hope it'll last. The Ukrainian army and volunteer fighters have pushed Russian forces east, sparing this port city, blocking Russia's push to seize the country's entire western Black Sea coast. The supermarkets are fully open, even if some shelves are empty, fresh milk still missing. Alexander and his family seem to savor the mundane task of grocery shopping. He begins to tell us the Russians have been stopped when his wife Svetlana interrupts him to say, "We're still afraid." On the surface, life seems to be resuming most of its regular rhythms, but that's just the surface. All over the city, there are piles of these old tires intended to be set alight to obscure the vision of invading Russian forces. And there are also among the tires Molotov cocktails. Around the city, signs of destruction. This empty hotel struck several days ago in the early afternoon. Natasha was at home nearby when it happened. In this predominantly ethnic Russian city, she scoffs at the idea Russia is waging war on her behalf.
Not for our country and not for Russian people.
The Red Cross has turned this wedding hall into a center providing medicine, diapers, and other supplies. What they can't provide, however, is a sense this nightmare is coming to an end. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
And still to come, a Norwegian paramedic could not stand by while people flee for their lives in Ukraine. We'll have more on the life-saving service he and others are offering. We'll be right back.
There are a lot of chronographs around, but it's difficult to make one that stands out. But the Portugueser does. In the late 30s, which was a tough time for the Swiss watch industry, with war brewing in Europe, a Portuguese retailer approached IWC in search of a men's wristwatch with a high degree of accuracy. By the early 40s, in the midst of the Second World War, IWC delivered, and the Portugueser was born. One distinctive feature of the watch was its size, 43 millimeters in diameter, because inside, and this is how IWC answered the retailer's request, was a highly accurate pocket watch movement. Not many Portuguesers were produced from the end of the war until 1993, when the brand launched a new model to celebrate its 125th anniversary.
As consumers, we live in an on-demand economy. We want our goods and services delivered the same day, and this trend is not slowing. So at TuSimple, we are developing the world's first fully autonomous trucking solution, and we believe autonomous trucks will play an important part of the industry to make it more resilient and efficient. If you think about what it means to make an autonomous truck, we basically have a lot of sensors, cameras, LiDARs, radars that take input data from the world, so we see the world around us. And we have to have a very smart software, our virtual driver, that is using the most cutting edge artificial intelligence and machine learning technology and give very specific, safe, reliable commands to the vehicle. So this was really industry first, no driver on board, no remote control of the vehicle, and true commercial operations of a fully autonomous truck.
In a special ongoing season of the Tug of War podcast, CNN reporters are on the ground in Ukraine, documenting Russia's invasion, the escalating conflict, and what it means for the rest of the world. Tug of War. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
On New Frontiers. Go beyond your world. Journey to different lands and discover unique cultures. Uncover bold stories about business, innovation, and hidden gems. This month, Bangladesh. See an eco-friendly alternative to plastic bags. A new take on tea. And meet a fashion designer who's on the rise. New Frontiers, today on CNN.
Now safe in Poland, refugees are describing horrific conditions brought on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
People have nowhere to live. All infrastructure is destroyed. There's no water, no electricity, nothing. But our people are like this. They will simply start defending themselves. We will defend ourselves to the last, as long as we're alive.
That old lady and her dog. According to the UN, more than 3.7 million people have fled to safety in other countries since the war began. While in Poland, President Biden met with Ukrainian refugees at the National Stadium, carrying a Ukrainian girl at one point in his arms and offering comfort to those who've been displaced. Despite the millions who've already fled Ukraine, there are countless others still trying to escape. One Norwegian volunteer paramedic is bravely making daily trips to Ukraine to help as many people as he can flee to Poland. CNN's Ed Lavandera has his story.
At any given moment across Ukraine, there are countless people on the streets doing whatever they can to help in the war effort. So when missile strikes happen near a populated area like we saw on Saturday in Lviv, that sends shivers down the spines of all those people trying to help.
The air raid sirens no longer startled Diedrich Gunestad.
The sirens are telling us it's no danger anymore.
With that, he eases the nerves of a mother and her two children he's just picked up at the train station. Tonight, he will drive them to Poland. Diedrich Gunestad struggles to explain how a 27-year-old from Norway has found himself driving an ambulance through the streets of Lviv.
That's the most difficult question, actually.
He's part of a volunteer team evacuating critically ill hospital patients and refugees from Ukraine.
I just wanted to help, do something, not sit at home and just look at everything on the TV.
Most days, Diedrich drives into Lviv from Poland with an ambulance full of medical supplies and distributes the loads to hospitals facing grave shortages. Zorana Ivanyuk is the medical director of the St. Nicholas Hospital in Lviv. She says since the start of the war, her hospital has been overwhelmed treating everyday seriously ill patients.
He brings us some medicines, some equipment, which we need so much. That's why we are thankful for him and his team. It's really dream team.
hospitals are struggling to handle all the patients needing critical life-saving care. That's where Diedrich's team comes in.
We have just delivered a lot of equipment to that hospital and to another hospital. We went to the train station and picked up a few refugees as well.
He's lost count of how many patients and refugees he's driven out of Ukraine.
I have helped a lot of kids, women and children who needs to go out of the country. And in the places we are getting the people, they don't have anyone else. For right now, they only have us.
Diedrich and his team of paramedics and nurses have spent almost 3 weeks crisscrossing the city, answering any call for help that comes in.
How stressful is it to drive around Ukraine right now?
Oh my God. It's horrific, and it's not possible to explain.
This area of western Ukraine has seen just a few Russian airstrikes since the war started nearly a month ago. But Russian forces have targeted hospitals and civilians in eastern Ukraine. Diedrich knows he's driving into potential targets. It's a risk he's willing to take.
Is doing this worth dying for you?
Yeah, it is. Because it's so meaningful what I'm doing. When I see these crying children who are really sick and needs to get out, I feel a responsibility.
For Diedrich Gunstad, it feels like the road to saving Ukrainians goes on forever.
I spoke with Diedrich just moments after that explosion happened in Lviv on Saturday, and he told me that he happened to have 3 patients in the back of his ambulance at that very moment, that they weren't too far away from where the explosion detonated. He says it took him a little while to figure out exactly what the sound was and where it was coming from, but as soon as they put it all together, they stopped everything and started driving straight to the Polish-Ukrainian border, and he tells me that they all made it across safely late Saturday afternoon, and in his eyes, it's 3 more people that he's been able to evacuate safely out of this war-torn country.
That was Ed Lavandera. And still ahead, the mood appears to be improving in some parts of Kyiv, though we're using those words carefully still, as Ukrainian troops press forward with a counteroffensive around the capital city. We'll bring you that story coming up.
Nothing is ever given to you in life. If you want to be a great businessman, you got to put in the work. And the same applies to survivors of trafficking. My name is Given Kachepa, and I'm now a dentist in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Zambia. We grew up very poor. I was trafficked into the United States by an organization known as TTT Partners in Education. The mission of the organization was to go to African countries and bring kids to America to sing in churches. We were singing in malls. We were singing in schools. So the ministry had different ways of making revenue, and yet those of us that were singing were not receiving a penny from that. My dental practice is based here in North Dallas. We've been here now 5 years. It's been an exciting, wonderful journey. My goal as a dentist in the future is opening up clinics in Zambia. We have 2 of them that we've built from the ground up. And being a business person today, I just cannot foresee a situation in which I would work somebody without compensating them for the work that they're doing. It's important to me that we all try to get along and make life a little bit easier for each other.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action.
I'm Will Ripley in Taipei, Taiwan, and this is CNN.
Welcome back. I'm Hala Garanyu reporting live from Lviv in Ukraine. Well, the fire is still raging at a fuel depot here in Lviv following multiple Russian strikes on Saturday. Take a look at the scene during the day as flames and thick black smoke rose from one of the targets. Ukrainian officials say at least 5 people were hurt in this attack. Lviv sits close to the Polish border, and so far it's largely been spared the relentless bombardment we've seen in many other Ukrainian cities, though it suffered a few attacks. Now, this assault came as the U.S. President Joe Biden was in Poland, just a few hundred kilometers away, wrapping up a 4-day trip to Europe aimed at rallying Western support for Ukraine. He capped off his visit with a powerful, yet apparently unscripted rebuke of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Listen.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Those comments, this was one of the last things he said, but obviously they made the headlines. They sent shockwaves around the globe, though the White House later tried to clarify, saying Mr. Biden was not calling for regime change. However, the U.S. president did deliver a stark warning to Vladimir Putin should Russia's attacks extend beyond Ukraine's borders.
Don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops say they have recaptured several towns near the Russian border, including this village in northeastern Ukraine, where soldiers engaged in a fierce firefight with Russian troops reportedly holed up inside that building, which is, or was, I should say, used as a school. We're also seeing Ukrainian troops making gains around Kyiv, though intense fighting continues near the capital city. Arfred Pleiken is in the capital.
Massive battles continue here around the Kiev area, while it seems as though the Russians might be somewhat on the back foot, and the Ukrainians certainly are saying that they're pressing what they call a counteroffensive, especially towards the northwest of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and also towards the northeast of the capital as well. The Ukrainians claiming that they took some area back. For instance, if we look at the suburb of Irpin, the Ukrainians say that they have about 80% of that area right now. However, they also say that they are still being shelled by Russian forces. Now, needless to say, despite these gains, this city is still very much on a war footing because, of course, the Ukrainians understand that the gains that they've made so far are very fragile. There are still a lot of checkpoints here inside the city, cars being checked, especially by the territorial defense forces. But what we do see is that there are more people who are out and about. There's some shops that are opening, and also there seems to be a lot more traffic than there has been in the past couple of weeks. While we also see the territorial defense forces, they are still preparing for if the Russians might come back and might enter the city. In fact, we saw some who were practicing throwing Molotov cocktails in the most effective way. Still, they say right now the mood here in the city is improving.
Old businesses are returning to work. There are more and more shops open every day. and you can see even, even traffic is becoming much more denser than even 2 or 3 days ago.
And this is a really strong city with strong citizens, and we defend it a lot because this is the capital, and this is like logical that they would try to attack us more once again and again.
But you will win.
Yes, no doubts.
Now, while the folks from those territorial defense forces certainly seem to be very confident, I think it's still pretty clear to the leadership here that the gains that they've made so far, especially around Kyiv, are things that can be reversed. There still is a massive army standing essentially at the gates to this city, and certainly going to be some pretty tough battles still ahead. Fred Pleitgen, CNN, Kyiv.
Thank you, Fred, for that. That's going to do it from me for now. Let's go to Christy Lu Stout in Hong Kong. Christy.
Hala, thank you. And Hala will be back at the top of the hour. But just ahead, women and girls in the Afghan capital are taking to the streets. Find out what recent Taliban decision triggered this brave backlash. And U.S. officials, health officials, they are expected to sign off on a second COVID booster shot. We'll discuss who will be eligible.
I'm David McKenzie in Cape Town, and this is CNN.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
Our mission here at CNN and of journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about an alleged plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
If you're craving red meat but don't want to actually eat it, those imitation burgers might hit the spot. You can find them in grocery stores, restaurants, and even drive-thrus. But are they healthy? Well, meatless burgers do contain protein, vitamins, and minerals, and many times they are similar to the protein profile of the meats they imitate. They also contain vitamin B12 and zinc, but beware, these imitation burgers are highly processed and usually contain high levels of sodium and saturated fat. So check your labels and eat them in moderation. They're not health food, even if they are tasty and environmentally friendly. Veggie burgers that are made of beans, vegetables, brown rice, or quinoa are the healthiest option of all. Choose one with seeds and whole grains, and that burger is a meal you can feel good about.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
Girls and women hit the streets of Kabul to protest on Saturday, just days after the Taliban in Afghanistan reneged on a promise and made education for many young women difficult, if not impossible. The demonstrators chanted against the Taliban's decision to keep girls above 6th grade out of school. It's supposedly until Sharia-appropriate school uniforms are designed, but demonstrators, they were not buying that.
Unfortunately, by the advent of the Taliban, all our schools were closed. We girls are allowed to study same like boys. Islam has given us this right, but the Taliban has taken this right from us.
The move quickly drew international condemnation, and the U.S. canceled planned meetings with the Taliban. Paula Newton has more on the growing outrage.
The Taliban decision to bar Afghan girls above 6th grade from returning to school has triggered a concrete backlash. American officials say Wednesday's decision could be a potential turning point in engagement as they canceled planned meetings with the Taliban in Doha.
The decision by the Taliban, if it is not swiftly reversed, will profoundly harm the Afghan people, the country's prospects for economic growth, and the Taliban's ambition to improve their relations with the international community.
For the first time in more than 7 months, Afghan schools reopened Wednesday for a much-anticipated return. But it was a day that ended in heartbreak, tears, and anger for many. After the Taliban announced girls above 6th grade must stay home. That decision came just hours after schools had reopened, many eager female students arriving back only to find they wouldn't be let inside.
Why are they playing with our future? We have rights. We are humans from this country. We want to be free. We just want to continue our education. Is it a sin that we are girls?
A Taliban news agency said the delay is so uniforms can be designed according to Sharia and Afghan customs. But the decision is viewed by many as an excuse, as condemnation rings out across the globe.
This is of grave concern at a time when the country desperately needs to overcome multiple intersecting crises.
No country can grow by excluding women and girls from education. I mean, the fact that we still have to say this in the 21st century.
In recent months, the Taliban have repeatedly insisted they would not go back to how things were in the late 90s and early 2000s, when women and girls were banned from working or going to school. It has been 7 months since this now iconic scene of thousands stranded at the airport in Kabul, desperately trying to leave after the Taliban's takeover. Now, those left behind seeing human rights withering away, among them, the tearful schoolgirls whose hopes of an education are now shattered. Paula Newton, CNN.
Older adults in the United States may soon have the option of getting a second COVID-19 booster shot. The Food and Drug Administration is expected to authorize a 4th dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for those older than 50. That decision is expected as early as next week. And soon after that, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is expected to follow suit with a similar recommendation. The U.S. is limiting the use of a particular COVID treatment due to a more contagious subvariant. The Food and Drug Administration says that the monoclonal antibody treatment called Sotrovimab has been successful keeping people out of the hospital, but it does not seem to help people who contracted the Omicron subvariant known as BA.2. Now, the FDA says that BA.2 is now the dominant strain in at least 8 states, 2 territories, and it's rising elsewhere. It's also driving a surge in cases in parts of Europe, particularly the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands. And joining us now is Anne Rimoin. She is a professor in the epidemiology department at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, and she joins us now live from Los Angeles. Professor, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about BA.2 and what we know about the new Omicron subvariant. It's apparently more transmissible than BA.1, but does it cause more severe illness?
Well, thanks for having me, Christy. And this is a good question. So BA.2 appears to be more transmissible, maybe even 50 to 60% more transmissible, but it does not appear to cause more severe disease. So that's good news.
Very good news. And look, we know that cases caused by BA2 remain relatively high, relatively speaking, across Asia. There's also this new wave of BA2 infections happening across Europe. And we're starting to see a rise in BA2 cases in the U.S. Is this going to be another surge in the U.S.?
Well, we don't really know. What we're starting to see here in the United States and in North America in general is an uptick in wastewater surveillance. So we're starting to detect it in greater and greater quantities here. It's now becoming the dominant variant here. We've started to see in New York City, for example, an uptick in cases and in certain parts of the United States. But it's really unclear what kind of an increase we're going to see. Are we going to see a surge as we saw before? Or are we just going to see a smaller wave? It really depends upon the kind of immunity that we have here. But interestingly, what we're seeing in the UK, where they did also have a very large Omicron surge, they do have a very high rate of cases. Hospitalizations are starting to increase there as well. So we need to be watching these indicators very closely and be ready to act if we start to see a large increase.
Yeah, and that action could also take the form of an additional booster shots. In the U.S., the FDA is set to approve additional booster shots for adults over the age of 50 next week. I'm already boosted here in Hong Kong. My folks in America already boosted. But will we all need another booster shot?
Well, sooner or later, we're all going to need another booster shot. I think it's pretty clear that the immunity that we get from the vaccine in terms of preventing infection is waning, although it is still doing a good job at preventing severe disease, hospitalization, and death in most people. Now, immunocompromised people need to be very vigilant about getting these doses as they are recommended, but we're still looking at the data and trying to understand how important is this next dose, when does it need to happen, and what kind of long-term benefit are we going to see? So we're still looking at the data, but it's great that these doses are going to be available. I think that is a very prudent thing to do, given that even if BA2, this Omicron subvariant, doesn't create a very large wave, this virus is going to continue to spread. When it spreads, it has opportunity to mutate, and we need to be ready for the next surge.
Yeah, and as the virus continues to evolve, continues to mutate, and perhaps additional subvariants could emerge, are we seeing a scenario that we're going to have to take booster shots the same way we take a flu shot every season?
I think it's very reasonable to expect that we'll need to have a regular shot, like a flu shot. And likely we're going to start to see these vaccines updated on an annual basis based on what we see circulating. So I think, right now we're seeing this, the vaccines prevent these most severe outcomes, but we really don't know how long that's going to hold out. And we don't know what variant is going to arise that really could evade the immune response that has been elicited by these vaccines to keep people out of the hospital and from dying. So we're going to have to watch it very closely and be ready to act. And everybody should anticipate sooner or later we'll need another dose.
And I got to ask you about the risk of reinfection. What if someone contracted a previous variant? Could they become reinfected with BA2?
Absolutely. We've seen people who've been infected with previous variants get reinfected with the Omicron variant. We've seen people who have been fully vaccinated and boosted get infected with the Omicron variant. The big question is if you've had Omicron, will you get reinfected with this BA2 subvariant? And the answer is it's possible. A Danish study recently in preprint, not yet peer-reviewed, has suggested that you can get reinfected from BA1 to BA2. Those reinfections are rare.
All right, Professor Anne Rimoin, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for lending your expertise to our audience. Take care.
My pleasure.
You're watching CNN Newsroom, and up next, firefighters in the U.S. They want to help colleagues in Ukraine who also fight the flames. After the break, the Americans are collecting all sorts of equipment the Ukrainians might also need. We'll talk to guys at the firehouse that started it all.
open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets. It takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
It's so great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest.
I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them?
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move, very eerie.
All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the theme that you arrived to.
The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest.
We continue to monitor the government in crisis.
This was the Duchess's first news interview. Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about.
Max Foster, CNN.
Now, firefighters in New Jersey are also joining the aid efforts. They are collecting everything from helmets to boots and tools from around the U.S. to send to fellow firefighters in Ukraine. Now, CNN's Alexandra Field reports dozens of fire departments have responded to the call.
Everything that you see in here in this trailer, it's going to get shipped out to Ukraine.
Where emergency responders on the front line badly need it.
I need more.
10 tons of firefighting gear and supplies have already been boxed up here in Clifton, New Jersey. They're en route now to the war zone. The plan is to send it all to the Polish Fire Service, which will pass it over to Ukrainian firefighters.
How are you, sir? How you doing?
The collection effort, nothing short of monumental, was the idea of Oleg Skachko, who was born in central Ukraine and moved to the U.S. when he was 14. 3 years ago, he joined Clifton, New Jersey's fire department.
Seeing how the Brotherhood runs through the departments, that was one of the reasons.
When Russia invaded his home country, Skachko says he knew his Ukrainian brothers needed him too.
You see the Brotherhood not just in the United States, but all over the country, and including overseas. Everybody comes in at once in the time of need.
What started as an effort to collect a few sets of turnout gear to send over quickly turned into 1,100 sets, and so much more.
We wanted to focus on firefighter personal protective equipment, which would be your coat, your pants, hood, helmet, and gloves and boots. And then we branched out just a little bit further and told people that we would need hand tools. And then we branched out a little bit further onto the medical side with backboards.
To date, the donations, mostly retired gear but perfectly usable, have come from more than 100 fire departments across the country.
We were getting contacted by departments in Colorado and Minnesota.